Before I waste anyone's time, I have 3 questions. If you know the answers, you get to click off the video. Each one gets progressively tougher. Question 1. Who is Britain's current Prime Minister? Question 2. Why did Liz Truss resign after just 45 days as Prime Minister? And question 3. Can you name one Boris Johnson policy outside of Brexit and COVID? Don't panic. If you don't know the answers, you're not dumb, you're just in the dark. Given that the current US president doesn't even know what AUKUS is, and given that he started tariffing us, the UK could once again be a very close partner. It's probably worth knowing what they've been up to for the last 15 years. And thankfully, you don't need to go anywhere. We're about to shortcut 15 years. The Mystery M Universe has about 8 hours of content on this exact topic. And in this video, we're getting our scissors out and cutting it down to the most crucial details that you need to know. And because I'm repurposing old material, we're bringing back the giraffe. At the same time, I'm using stuff from the podcast, but with that material, I'll include some visuals as well to help you picture things. And before we can even get into David Cameron, we have to see how the UK Labour Party became so unpopular. In 1997, Blair smashed Major in a landslide victory, and on day 1, kicked off New Labour by handing over control of interest rates to the Bank of England. 2 weeks later, Blair went to Northern Ireland to try and resolve the 3-decade-long conflict between the Unionists and the IRA. Apart from wanting peace, Blair was keen to show that New Britain was going to be a global player again, and not just a dwindling power. The result was a resounding success for Blair, who a year later helped facilitate the Good Friday Agreements. Essentially, Irish paramilitaries would disband in return for the UK reducing their forces in Northern Ireland and allowing people to have Irish or British citizenship. Blair's Chancellor of the Exchequer, what we'd call Treasurer, Gordon Brown, had the tough job of delivering the budget. Now, for New Labour, they promised to spend no more than the Tories were without raising common taxes. So how exactly do you do that? Well, this was his idea.
I say it is right that we employ the unfair profits of the privatised utility to pay for a fair deal for the unemployed.
Essentially, privatised utility companies would be taxed for their unused profits, what we call a windfall tax. Blair argued that this was making up for the fact that the Conservatives sold off utilities at massively undervalue and then retired to fat jobs on these boards, as these companies then massively overcharged common people for power. It was a one-off tax that gave the government about £5 billion, which it then invested in getting 2 million people into a job by providing training, subsidising employment, and providing voluntary work to the unemployed. It was a huge success for Labour and was much more imaginative than just hiking corporate or income tax. On top of that, Blair pumped a whole lot more money into the NHS.
A predecessor of mine famously said she wanted to be able to go into the hospital of her choice on the day I want, at the time I want, with the doctor I want. Remember that? Margaret Thatcher's argument for going private. I want to go to the hospital of my choice on the day I want, at the time I want, but I want it on the National Health Service.
So by the year 2000, Labour had the budget in a healthy surplus, and so put $2 billion extra into the NHS and $1 billion extra into education. By the end of Labour's stint in office, the amount spent on both education and health would be doubled. Brown and Blair then moved to introduce the national minimum wage and offered tax credits to parents to reduce child poverty. Pardon the pun, but it was all red rosy for Blair at the turn of the millennium. On top of this, he'd had some giant foreign policy successes as he persuaded Clinton to intervene to help the Kosovo Liberation Army negotiate a settlement with Yugoslavia, and his intervention in Sierra Leone stopped the endless cycle of military coups against the civilian government. In 2001, Blair managed to keep the massive majority of 1997, and despite this incident with his deputy John Prescott,
immediately swung round and landed a punch straight on his jaw. The man then wrestled the Deputy Prime Minister onto his back and held him down over a small wall as police and Labour Party officials tried to release him.
He managed to put the Tories to the sword. Of course, 2001 was crucial for something else that just so happens to result in YouTubers being demonetised. Blair supported Bush in his invasion of Afghanistan, and the world didn't bat an eye. But as it became apparent that Bush also wanted to invade Iraq, 2002 would see Blair come under heavy criticism for the first real time in the history of New Labour. Unlike Harold Wilson with Vietnam, Blair was viewed as rolling over to the Americans, especially considering that other EU nations like France and Germany explicitly rejected the idea of an invasion. Rather than take invasion off the table, Blair's angle was to push Bush to go through the UN, something that Vice President Dick Cheney viewed as unnecessary. Blair got Bush to push the UN for something called Resolution 1441, essentially an ultimatum to Saddam to disarm his weapons of mass destruction or face serious consequences. An intentionally vague threat. Well before the invasion, protests erupted in London. In March, Bush issued Saddam an ultimatum: leave Iraq in 48 hours or be invaded. The next day, Blair pressed the House of Commons for approval, offering his resignation should the vote fail. The vote did indeed get through, but not without damage to Blair. 149 MPs opposed it, most of which were Labour and not Conservative. Of course, no WMDs were found after the invasion. So the image of New Labour went from being centrist reformers to now being warmongers. This perception wasn't at all helped when right before the 2005 election, the Downing Street memo was leaked. It showed that back in 2002, the MI6 director had briefed Blair on how American intelligence would quote-unquote fit the policy of an invasion of Iraq, and that they'd use terrorism and WMDs to promote public support for it. On top of that, Blair had privatised British Rail, and so going into the 2005 election, a YouGov poll showed that most British voters viewed Blair, and indeed New Labour, as being on the right of the political spectrum. The saving grace for Blair was that the Conservatives supported the Iraq invasion and couldn't capitalise on Blair's dwindling popularity. So Labour held on, but lost a big chunk of its majority, while the Liberal Democrats picked up the biggest third-party vote since 1923. Ultimately, under pressure from within, Blair resigned in 2007, right before the GFC. By the way, I was wrong about Blair privatising UK Rail. That was actually John Major. But it was Blair's replacement, Gordon Brown, who had to go and deal with the GFC.
Have a look at these pie graphs here. In the blue are commercial banks. These are the ones that primarily give mortgages and invest in assets rather than businesses. Britain's share is 82% compared to France's 45% and Germany's 36%. As someone who lives in Sydney, i.e. one of the worst manufactured property bubbles in the world, let me tell you that this is dreadful for the economy as money goes into something that just stands still and doesn't produce anything, rather than something that generates actual value like new businesses. And if all that was too heavy with the graphs and the charts, here's Boris saying invertebrate jellies to bring you back.
What is it?
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
So with the UK banking sector so huge, it played a pretty huge role in the GFC, as American mortgages were traded between banks, which then incentivized banks to sign people up for ridiculous mortgages that they could never afford because they weren't the ones that had to deal with the fallout. The often heard saying was that UK banks turned the subprime mortgage crisis into a global financial crisis. So apart from being culpable for the GFC, the UK banks were heavily impacted by the GFC. One in particular was Northern Rock, Newcastle United's sponsor on FIFA 08. They actually suffered a bank run, essentially where everyone withdraws their money at once for fear of the bank failing, which in turn causes the bank to fail, and they were at risk of closing entirely. They reached out to the Bank of England for help and were eventually taken over by Gordon Brown's Labour government.
So Blair was unpopular because of Iraq, and Brown was bearing the brunt of the GFC. As the 2010 election looms, David Cameron proposed a different approach to the economy. This snippet that I'm about to show you comes from our 4-part podcast series on the Tories in government. But the Gordon Brown government made the decision that, hey, we're going to prioritise unemployment above inflation. And yes, that will mean running a pretty big budget deficit, but we think that's a better evil to face than mass unemployment. Kevin Rudd made the same decision in Australia. So we'd had surpluses for a long time before, as John Howard had famously run up for half a decade. And then Kevin Rudd comes in. He initially promises a surplus for the upcoming 08-09 financial year. And then he goes, stuff it. No way, when the collapse of Lehman Brothers happens and the GFC is triggered. So that was conventional wisdom across the world. America pursued a pretty similar policy, and Obama did that to not the same extent as Australia, but certainly had this interventionist approach. David Cameron comes in and he's like, you know what the real issue is? These budget deficits. And Gordon Brown's like, no, like that's not an issue. Like it's an issue if you do it for 15 years. Yeah, then you become Zimbabwe. Obviously, I'm not saying do this for 15 years, but probably do this for 5. Off the back of the GFC, we want to make sure that unemployment doesn't, soar to levels of 20%. We want to keep it completely under wraps and completely sustainable. David Cameron goes, no, that's going to make you Zimbabwe. If you prioritize unemployment rather than prioritize inflation, you're going to become Zimbabwe because you're going to keep printing off money and we're just going to effectively print off, £1 trillion more than what we actually have. And we will completely devalue our own currency if we do that. And Gordon Brown goes, no, I'm telling you right now, we are not going to do this for 15 years. We're going to do it for, let's just say 5. I'm pulling numbers out of the sky. Australia did it for about 15 years. It wasn't until between Kevin Rudd's first term and Jim Chalmers in Albo's first year. So Kevin Rudd's first year, Albo's first year, every year in between was a budget deficit.
Yeah. Yep.
So it can be done for 15 years. Inflation wasn't pretty, but it wasn't Zimbabwe levels for us or anything like that. And so basically that's the argument that Gordon Brown is making. So Cameron went into the 2010 election promising a strict budget, but Gordon Brown wasn't his only opponent. In Britain, there was a third party called the Liberal Democrats. But it's a bit of a problem for the Conservatives because they have their equivalent of what the Teals are in Australia. So you know how, the Teal independents that are basically, from the Liberal Party's point of view, a cancer for them because all of their metropolitan coastal seats...
They're at risk, yeah.
Yeah, are at risk because of them. Because
middle-class mums, they're moving.
Exactly. Yeah. Liberal Democrats aren't the exact same because the environment isn't as much of a focus as what it is for the Teals. But it's kind of seen as a protest vote against the Conservative Party. So the way they would talk about themselves is we don't believe in a party that's run by unions. We don't believe in national ownership of industry the same way Labor would advocate. But we're not a huge fan of worshipping the Queen and all that, English conservatism that's there. We want to be more socially progressive and socially liberal, hence the name Liberal Democrats. And so they start to run back in the 80s, but they start to gain some momentum in the 2010 election. Now, to win the 2010 election, or to win just any election at that time, you needed 326 votes, or 326 seats to form a majority government. In Australia, it's 76.
Yeah.
So we've seen it. We were witness to it, but we saw it on an empty day, so I don't think we got the full picture. But when you watch UK Parliament, look at how cramped they are in that little house compared to it's much more spacious in the Australian house. Yeah. It's because there's a lot of seats to get representation, and so you need to get 326 of them to form a majority government.
Jeez, there must be some. I don't know how they get by their fire safety.
Particularly Upper Tower as well.
Yeah. They must be dodging some legislation.
Those stairs seemed pretty. It didn't seem fire safe when we went. Put it that way.
Inaccessible for the politicians.
Yeah, 650 seats up for grabs. 326 to form a majority. And now the Liberal Democrats are eating away at the Conservatives' possibility of forming a majority government. So Gordon Brown, he's a Scottish dude, just policy nut, deeply uncharismatic, was kind of the economic thinker behind the Blair government, but had nowhere near the charisma that Tony Blair had. David Cameron, as I've probably made reference to, he had Riz. And he charmed me and he charmed lots of people in Britain. Young guy, basically wanted to modernise the Conservative Party, was kind of... I would say a more charming version of Malcolm Turnbull.
Sure.
And so he had a lot of popularity going into the 2010 election. And then you have the Liberal Democrats that are there as well, led by a guy called Nick Clegg. The Liberal Democrats said, if we get in, we are going to push for a referendum to allow preferential voting because they didn't have, it's just first past the post in Britain. So you can waste your vote quite easily voting for a minor party in Britain, whereas in Australia, you don't really waste your vote because it flows through to a majority. In most electorates, the real question is who you're going to put last, Liberal or Labor, and that's the deciding thing. And so he's saying, we come in, we get preferential voting. Obviously, that works really well for them because they pick up all the votes of people that are scared that they're wasting their vote by voting for a minority party. And basically, he says, look, we're going to be in a position where we can we can be the partner in a minority government for whoever gets in. And they're going to rely on our votes to get legislation through. So we're going to be in a pretty OP position for this one. And that's the thing that we're going to push for and get excited because this could be the first election in a long, long time that is neither Tory or Labor. And so he's making people feel a lot of things. So 2010 election rolls around and it is tight. 306 seats go to the Tories, 205 go to Labor, and then 57 go to the Liberal Democrats. Do you remember the magic number you needed to form government?
326.
They're short.
They are short.
They need 20 seats. A lot of people in the Conservative Party go to David Cameron and they go, dude, do 2 years and we don't have any partners. We just do a case-by-case legislation because out of all, you think about the Northern Ireland Unionists and whatever, the people that are really keen to have Northern Ireland not go independent, they'll vote for us on some things. The Scottish National Party will vote for us on other things. The Liberal Democrats will vote for us on other things. Just, we don't form a permanent partner we just go law by law and we just pick the person. And then 2 or 3 years in, the public will get very frustrated at this. We call an early election and they'll vote the Tories in because they get really mad that they keep holding these laws up. That's one bit of advice. But that's unstable for David Cameron because that doesn't give him much time in office. They do 5-year election cycles in the UK and he could be a 2-year prime minister.
Embarrassing.
Yeah. So David Cameron goes, could do.
I hear you. I do.
Yeah, like, let me rephrase that back to you.
Yeah.
Again, very charming man. But he actually instead goes to Nick Clegg and he goes, have a look at Australia. Their conservative government in Australia, they have this thing called the coalition. You have the Liberal Party, you have the National Party. Now, I'm not saying you're the National Party in this dynamic. I know your name says Liberal, but do you want to be a minority partner in the coalition? Think about this. Cameron, Prime Minister. Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister.
Wow.
And so the vision was made pretty strongly to Nick Clegg. Nick Clegg goes, yep, that sounds good to me. And you get me, we have to hold a referendum on do we have preferential voting or not. So we have to put it to the people. David Cameron goes, deal, we're going to do it. Nick Clegg's thinking, great, this could massively boost us in the next election. David Cameron's going, you sucker. You've just called this referendum on terms where I'm going to make sure it gets killed. And so he's starting to get quiet. You know, when John Howard let the referendum for the Republic and John Howard was like, I'll let you vote, but why would you want to vote yes for this? Like, I mean, I'll let you, because I'm a Democratic guy, you decide, but who wants to be a Republic, right?
Yeah.
And so
there's some leading of the witness.
And so David Cameron's like, great, you've just given me, this is your ticket to get more seats, and you have given it to me on terms where I can absolutely crush it and make sure it never happens for a long, long time. And so David Cameron is thrilled. So there's 25 ministers that will form part of the Cameron-Clegg cabinet. So if we remember correctly, 306 of those ministers were Tories going for 25 spots, and then 57 of them were Liberal Democrats also going for 25 spots.
As in 25 in total for both groups,
Both
or
groups,
each group gets 25?
No, collectively.
Yeah.
So the Tories get 18 out of 25.
Good for them.
Liberal Democrats get 7 out of those 25. And you might think that's a pretty even share of things, but it actually isn't. 12% of Lib Democrat parliamentarians get to be cabinet ministers, and 5% of Tory members get to be cabinet ministers.
Okay.
So can you imagine if you have been in office since 97, so you came in when Tony Blair left, you have been slaving it away for 15 years, just about, waiting to get back into government, and you're really excited because you're a key player in the Conservative government. You cannot wait to get your ministry. And then David Cameron goes, oh, actually, these guys that came 2 minutes ago.
The cool group over here, I've started hanging out with them a bit more.
What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you the press conference that David Cameron and Nick Clegg gave together.
Oh, wow.
Prime Minister, do you now regret when once asked what your favourite joke was, you replied Nick Clegg? And Deputy Prime Minister, what do you think of that?
We're all going to have. I'm afraid I did once. We're all. I'm back. We're all going to have things that we said thrown back at us, and you know, there's a serious point in this, which is if you want to spend the next 5 years finding Lib Dem politicians who slightly disagree with Conservative politicians about this, or a slightly nuanced policy, you can find lots. But we're looking at the bigger picture. We're looking at what a bold move like this with a strong, stable government can achieve. And if it means swallowing some humble pie, and if it means eating some of your words, I cannot think of a more excellent diet in which to provide the country with good government.
Now, every viewer has the chance to massively boost the podcast. Right now, we fluctuate between the 10s and the 20s on Spotify's history podcast charts in Australia. But imagine if we actually cracked the top 10. Spotify bases podcast charts on ratings, downloads, and follows. So if you pause the video right here, click the link in the description, gave us a rating, followed us, and turned on notifications, collectively, you would actually have the power to put us in the top 10. But like we said, Cameron wanted to prioritize inflation over unemployment, and he used a specific word to describe his approach. We have spoken about this on the pod. Do you remember what the name of that policy was, particularly in Britain, to cut government spending?
Oh, I do know this. Is it austerity?
It is austerity.
Yes,
Very
come
good.
on.
Yeah, vamos.
Give her austerity.
So basically Cameron coined the term. Like the term had been around before. Austere is a Greek word. It's not a new word. But, you know, as a fine man of the classics and you're an Eton College educated boy does, he found a name for his policy that is rooted in classical literature. And so he's like, this is not going to be pretty years ahead. They're going to be austere years ahead, and 10 years down the track, we'll be smiling, but 3 years is going to be ugly. And we're going to cut a lot from the budget. His son actually died a year before he came into office as Prime Minister. Had, if I'm not mistaken, cerebral palsy and really bad seizures. And so people accused David Cameron of wanting to cut the NHS. David Cameron was very indignant about that and kind of said, I've been in these hospital waiting rooms for, hours on end, seeing nurses do round the clock care on my kid. How dare you suggest that I would even consider cutting the NHS? But he does. But I can't understand him coming from a place of personal grief. And so basically they're like, okay, we need to slash the budget. To get this inflation down, we need to slash the budget. And that's not necessarily the worst idea. If you slash in the right places and get rid of all the fat in the economy, so money that is paid to something that doesn't make more money in the economy, that's probably a good thing. That's probably a good way to go. But instead, they go, okay, we're going to have to slash every part of the budget. To make sure that we are bringing in more revenue than we are spending, we're going to have to slash every single part of the budget. NHS, wages are getting frozen. Schools, wages are getting frozen. Welfare, don't need that. Don't need the dole. You don't need, social pensions or anything like that. We're going to knock a couple of billion off that every year. Oh, and so everyone's like, oh, not liking this so far. This seems like a pretty nasty budget. You are going to hit corporate tax, right? You are going to put that up as well. What? You're going to hit corporate tax. That's going to go up, right? Oh, that's actually going down. And so that is the kicker. I think we can understand the austerity budgets a lot more if corporate tax also got hiked up and they go universal policy across the board. Everything's going up.
One rule for them.
Yeah, and this is where guys like Dave are making the argument. I'm just assuming I've watched 30 seconds of Dave. I'm just going to speak on his behalf here. But this is where you got you guys like Dave that are saying, Dave is in the rapper, not David Cameron, as I got confused by as of half an hour ago. Basically saying you're stealing from the poor to give to the rich. In the way.
Never a good look.
Yes. So 2009, the budget was in £175 billion of deficit. And correct me if I say dollars in any of the next.
I'll do my
figures.
best.
That's about 10.5% of their GDP. So they're spending about 110.5% of what they're making.
Putting in 110%. Who can blame them?
The 2010 budget, that deficit went from 175 billion down to 149 billion. So they chalked off $26 billion of government spending there, which on the surface, great news. Like John Howard's having like a
tea party.
That was actually 11% of the previous year's GDP. So as a percentage of GDP, the deficit still... So George Osborne gets up and he goes, every year, corporate tax will be cut by 1%. And Labor's like, what the heck? And so that's where he's getting in a very sophisticated, classy way compared to our parliament. A lot of those projectile comments are coming from. But he does vow to increase capital gains tax. So if you make money off property sale, and so that's received pretty warmly from a lot of people that, if you're just trading property or something like that, you're going to get taxed to foot the bill. But £3 billion was cut from the NHS and £5 billion was cut from welfare. And the former head of the Bank of England, so their equivalent of the RBA governor, the one that was there under Tony Blair, he basically said, this is going to put us straight back into a recession. Because if you're cutting all this spending, so let's just say let's go, Mandy from Blackpool relies on her pension to go get fried chicken on a Friday. That pension is being cut now, which means she cannot get fried chicken on a Friday. Now that fried chicken place on the corner of Blackpool next to like the Ferris wheel, whatever that's there, the roller coaster, they can't get their money now because people like Mandy can't buy their fried chicken, which means the local business goes out of business and then the contagion happens amongst low SES people and people that don't have much money. And so basically the former head of the Bank of England, he goes, this is madness. This will absolutely trigger a recession and we will have we've had the GFC and he called it the double dip effect. We've had the GFC, we're going to have a recession in the next couple of years that's even worse than the GFC. And so it gets some really strong critics. I'm going to rattle these off pretty quickly. But the key thing is that the budget deficit is going down. So 2011, the budget deficit goes down to 121 billion. 2012, it goes down to 90 billion. 2013, it goes back up to 108 billion. But 2014, it goes down to 84 billion. And then in 2015, it goes down to 76 billion. So if you want to give George Osborne credit, he's good at cutting the budget.
Does it cut as a percentage of GDP as well?
Yeah, so as a percentage of GDP, it goes down to about 5%.
Okay.
So he's done a very good job at following through with what he said he was going to do, in that he had to cut the budget. And by a lot of people in Britain, it's pretty warmly received. So again, we've spoken about this on the pod. Me, with my no knowledge of economics or whatever, I was a year 7 boy in 2010. I remember the 2010 election between Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard. The Labor ad was that they kept us out of the GFC. The Liberal ad was that Labor's reckless with money because we had a green on the graph. Now we've got a lot of red on the graph. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, obviously the Liberals are right. Like you can't just spend. That's just reckless economics. And that's probably just how a lot of people in Britain thought about it. I think Labor's biggest tactical mistake was Labor did not prosecute the case well, that this would create an economic issue for everyone. They just said it would create an economic issue for the poor. And so a lot of middle classes were like,
we'll be all right.
And they were also like, well, people shouldn't get benefits anyway. I work super hard to, get a place to bought my home in Gosforth or wherever. Why should someone who is in Blackpool, who's refusing to work and is just playing GTA all day, why should they get any money from the government? And they went Labor's mistake is they went the compassion route of like, oh, think about them. Think about how hard the opportunities aren't as equal. And that's just going to peeve someone off, because if they get told that they're in a privileged position compared to someone else, everyone's instinct is to go, piss off. I'm not in a privileged position. I worked so hard to get to where I got to. Whereas I think the argument that would have been more potent is you need Cheryl from Blackpool to get fried chicken, because that is going to directly impact your place of work down the flow of the economy. She needs to be out there spending and buying fried chicken. If she's sitting idly in her home, not working, but also not spending in the economy, she is completely idle in the economy. So you need her to stimulate the economy. And probably how you do that is you tax from where the fat is, and then you give to where the fat isn't, which is people like Cheryl from Blackpool who just don't have the money. I personally don't believe that austerity was that good for Britain, but it wasn't that unpopular. And in 2015, Britain went to the polls again, and this time Cameron finally won his majority. But just a year later, he was out. And referendums had been very successful for the British government in David Cameron's time. He had used it as a way of basically getting what he wanted and as a way of kind of shutting up his opposition.
So you mentioned last episode the referendum with
preferential voting.
Yeah, so that just got
2011.
crunched.
Got absolutely smashed, which is a real shame because like we live in a country where it works really well, and basically,
I saw a Greens ad today that was like,
I think I saw the same ad.
Yeah, one of our friends shared on their Instagram story explaining why giving your vote to a minor party doesn't just ruin it, like doesn't mean it loses.
In the Senate, it kind of does, but in the lower house, it doesn't. Yeah. Apart from like diversion of resources to try and fight for your seat, that could.
Sure.
But when it comes on a major note, it doesn't. You could say that it worked really well in Australia, but David Cameron goes, "Oh no, it's way too complex. You don't want." I know why I'm doing the Boris voice. You don't want any of that. It's mumbo jumbo. If you can't understand it, why would you want that to be a voting system? And it lost 68 to 32%.
Yeah, okay.
It's smashed. Absolutely smashed. And it's crazy because it's not that complex.
Yeah.
It really isn't. Like, we use preferential voting. No, not really. Like, in the school captain election, you get, like, if you have your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, it's not quite the same because, if Logan doesn't get his votes, they don't flow through to Ben or whatever. But a form of preferential voting is used in year 6 elections in primary schools.
Yeah, like a weighted kind of voting, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, just got completely knocked down. Then in 2014, the Scottish Nationalist Party were, like, they'd done really well in the 2011 local Scottish elections. So for the local Scottish councils, the Scottish Nationalist Party killed it. And so then Cameron was like, oh, far out, not this now. We can't afford to have you go independent as well. So he's like, okay, what are we going to do? We've got all these Scottish nationalists that want to break Scotland away from the United Kingdom. Let's just hold a referendum. Scotland. And I'm going to vehemently campaign against this. Scotland, do you want to leave the UK or not? And for a little while, it was looking like Scotland actually would. And you'd have the Republic of Scotland, which is crazy. But they didn't. And so he wins that one. So that was 55 to 45%. And so Scotland voted Remain. And so David Cameron is growing increasingly confident that he can just use this to get what he wants. So if he's facing an internal issue and needs to shut up someone, so he's shut up the Liberal Democrats. He's now shut up the Scottish National Party. If he wants to shut up these pro-Brexit guys, just hold a referendum and watch them lose. And as the Prime Minister, my approval seems to carry a lot of weight. And this was only intensified in the 2015 general election. Again, in 2010, they had to govern with effectively a minority government in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. They didn't this time because the Liberal Democrats went from 57 seats to 8 seats. Because all their voters were like, oh, you were cool when you were the protest party, but now that you did a full term in government and you kind of did austerity and all that, you're not pure anymore. It's like, oh, who would have thought? Turns out when you actually have to govern, you need to negotiate competing interests and you can't be this like completely morally pure protest party. I did feel pretty bad for them, but they lost the 2015 election. Conservatives picked up 330 seats.
Okay, so just snuck over
the 326 threshold. And so David Cameron's like, great, okay, clearly I'm liked, clearly I'm popular, and if we go to pro-Brexit and I campaign, if we have a referendum on Brexit and I campaign against it, it's not going to win. But as any referendum is, this is an opportunity for some people to get either some revenge against David Cameron or to make a name for themselves. Malcolm Turnbull made his name in Australia with the Republic referendum.
Yeah.
Jacinta Price made her name with the Voice to Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great opportunity for anyone that's in the Conservative Party that might want to go up against Cameron and campaign against their own leader in order to basically make a name for themselves. Did you know Boris Johnson was actually a Remainer until it was announced as a referendum?
I didn't know that.
I think you told us that in the our Brexit episode, potentially.
Yeah. So Boris Johnson had said, like, on the balance of things, I'm more pro-Remain than pro-Leave. One day, David Cameron and Boris Johnson are playing tennis, presumably like reminiscing about the Eton days. And afterwards, Cameron's like, I can trust you in for the vote Remain, right? And Boris is like, I don't know.
Oh.
And then send him a text like 2 weeks later being like, I'm out. I'm pro-Leave. I'll be campaigning against you. The cynic would say he's had his moment as the Mayor of London. He's had his invertebrate jellies moment.
Yeah.
The cynic would say that this is Boris Johnson using this as an opportunity to make a name for himself in federal parliament.
So what's Boris's role at this point? He's Mayor of London?
No. So he's in the federal conservative after 2015. He's in the Federal Conservative Party now.
Okay. Yeah.
Imagine Chris Minns running for a federal seat in the next election.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that happens. Remember Michael Gove, the education secretary who introduced? Yeah. He got sacked by David Cameron. Well, kind of demoted to chief whip. A whip is someone, so in Australian government, we don't really need whips because our party discipline is very strong. In the Labor Party, you literally cannot vote against Labor or you'll be kicked out of the party. In the Liberal government, you can only vote against the Liberal government if it's a conscience issue, like abortion or gay marriage or something like that. So only those unique social issues can you go against your party. In the US and the UK, it's far more free-for-all, and people go against their own party all the time. And so a whip is the person who makes sure that the votes are in order before a law is proposed into Parliament, so that you don't end up with egg on your face. The whip is responsible for making sure you have the numbers.
Yeah.
And sometimes...
Sort of like... Yeah, like on a Facebook event when they're like, "Hey, can you just RSVP?" So
yeah.
We can get,
with a bit more coercion of you will come to this wedding, otherwise you'll not be invited to the next one, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So he gets demoted to whip from education secretary. Michael Gove's not happy. He's been a Remainer his whole time. Now he becomes a pro-Brexiter. Was this an attempt to try and avenge himself? Because he was really annoyed that he was taken out of education. He had, by all accounts, he had no ambition to be the leader. And you can read interviews where he gets asked, do you want to become the leader at some point? And he doesn't give like a tentative, like, oh, my loyalties to the current Prime Minister. He goes, oh, no, it'd be awful.
Yeah,
so right. It's like, okay, pretty decisive. So I think this is probably a revenge attack on David Cameron. And so David Cameron starts, very positively, and he's very confident that Brexit will kind of completely kill this next insurrection, but it's one gamble too many. And
flew too close to the sun.
Brexit was Brexit. It happened. It went ahead. And David Cameron fell on his sword. And he said, well, there's no choice. I think he could have. He totally could have carried on as Prime Minister. But he said it's not right for a pro-Remainer to lead the exit negotiations. You've spoken. I'm out. And I was like, bro, like you could have been you could have had Thatcher status. You won the 2015. Again, elections only come around every 5 years unless you call an early one. You could have hung around for a very long time because you won. 2015 election went awesome for you, and then less than a year later, you're out. You've lost your job because you gambled one too many times. And so after Brexit doesn't go through, he resigns, and then he hums on his way out. And that's when people get really mad because you're like, you've given us this mess. You better hang around to deal with this mess. And he's like, dum 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 dum. Right, off to the cricket.
Right, yes. What time's my tea time? You know.
So David Cameron's resignation saw Theresa May take over. The Conservative Party was divided as to whether to go for a soft Brexit, i.e. negotiated one with the EU, or a hard Brexit, as in no negotiations and risk the complete loss of free trade. This would end Theresa May. And as everyone is saying, as Theresa May herself said, Brexit means Brexit. I need to deliver a deal. And she strikes up a deal called the Chequers Plan. And basically this keeps a lot of the EU infrastructure in place. So the UK would follow the EU rules when it came to regulations for goods coming into your country in terms of like quality and inspection and that sort of thing. And then in return, the EU wouldn't put tariffs on the UK. So sort of soft Brexit deal there. Free trade between the EU would happen for finance, technology and insurance. So another soft Brexit sort of thing going on there. There was no free movement into the UK. So that's a hard Brexit. So you can't just go, let's just say you get processed by Greece as a refugee. Then you go from Greece to Italy to France up through the tunnel or on the
Eurostar.
You can't do that anymore. So we get complete control. So that's a hard Brexit thing, which a lot of people voted against migration. When it came to external trading, it could do whatever it wanted with the outside world and didn't have to pass the EU. Pretty sensible deal. I'm like, look, that is the best deal you're going to get. And it kind of respected both extremes that was going on in England. I actually thought, fair play to Theresa May. I thought that's the best Brexit
There's
deal
your slogan.
You could possibly get. What's the slogan?
Fair play.
Fair play, Theresa May. Take the cake. You good with you? Bear in mind, she is the sitting government at the time. She nearly has a majority. She only gets 202 votes and 432 oppose her. That's because a breakaway faction in the Conservative Party, led by Boris Johnson, is rallying people on the cry that Brexit means Brexit and we need to have a hard Brexit and we cannot go through with the Chequers Plan. She basically goes for it a second time and it doesn't get much better. 242 in favour, 391 against. So Theresa May has not been able to deliver Brexit, even though that's what she promised she would do, taking on from David Cameron. So Brexit has killed 2 prime ministers at this point. And so Theresa May goes, I cannot continue on as prime minister. I'll hang around in the backbenches, sure, I'm happy to do that. But I cannot continue on as prime minister because I tried to get Brexit done. You lot have stopped me from getting Brexit done. This is the best deal we're going to get. Go, have Boris, or have whoever you want to lead, have Boris be a leader, but you're getting a way worse deal, and I will resign my leadership. So she steps down.
Rage quit.
She does.
Yeah.
Which means that the Tories need to vote for a new leader. And in 2016, it was looking like they would directly vote for their prime minister, but they didn't in the end. This time, a couple of people have thrown their hat in the ring, one of them being Boris Johnson, and their job is Theresa May will stay on as a caretaker. Their job is to go to the people of Britain and every member in the Conservative Party plead for their vote to be the leader of the Tories. And as you can probably imagine, one leader above the rest of the Tories really shone through with their charisma. By the way, if just 100 of you gave us ratings, we would actually be ahead of politics now. Anyway, in 2019, the Tories needed a new leader, and for them, it wasn't actually as simple as just the party putting forward someone new. And then the yes, leave, hard Brexit vote will be concentrated purely on me. And if it goes to a popular vote, we know what the popular sentiment is. They're not going to vote for a Remainer.
Simple tactic.
Now, Michael Gove is a bit of a problem. So Boris Johnson, it's believed. We never know. We will never know this for sure, but it's been pretty well speculated and a lot of people in his cabinet haven't denied this at all, is that Boris Johnson has gone, well, I've got a lot of support from MPs because I'm the leader of the Brexit faction in the Conservative Party. I'm going to have an excess. I will comfortably make the top 5. So if it's just an aggregate of the 5 highest people that get through to the next round, if we can like knock Michael Gove off, what we can do is we can donate some of our supporters to Remainers. And so...
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know if in Survivor you've seen the strategy of splitting the vote to flush out an idol. So if you've got such a strong majority alliance and you want to get rid of someone from a rival alliance that are far weaker, if you're in a position of more than 2 to 1 of a ratio,
you can't put all your eggs in one basket.
You split the vote so that if they play an idol, it won't matter because the next person will go.
You've been watching the new season?
I have not watched it for a long time.
Nor have I. I've heard people are watching it though.
I struggled because...
Brains vs. Brawn.
Yeah, Heroes vs. Villains was my favourite season of American Survivor.
Yeah.
And they pulled the trigger too early on that one in Australia, and they went, rather than heroes and villains within the game, they went, this guy's a firefighter. I'm like, no, I don't like...
Okay.
This guy's a real estate agent. I'm like, that's pretty funny. I don't know if they did the real estate agent thing.
Get me on next season.
Yeah, we do. What happened to our campaign to get you on? To bring that back. Anyway, so he donates his votes, it's believed, to these pro-Remain guys, and it ends up going down to 2, and the guy that he's up against is exactly who he wants, a guy called Jeremy Hunt, who is an avid Remainer. And he wanted a soft Brexit, and he was pro-Theresa May going ahead with a soft Brexit. So Boris Johnson, basically, it's time to give his speech. It's so straightforward. Brexit means Brexit. He doesn't need to pull out any Peppa Pig content or anything like that. And basically just goes, I'm not signing a deal with Brussels. And they're gonna kick us out, and that's gonna be okay because that's what we want. We don't want anything to do with the EU, and we don't want their stench looming over us. And so when it goes to the vote, he wins really convincingly.
Like what was the Remainers seeking to do if they were like what was Jeremy?
Yes, no one in the Conservative Party.
Like they wouldn't. You can't reverse it.
Well, you can because it's just a survey. It was like a gay marriage plebiscite. It was a non-binding survey.
The referendum.
In Britain, yeah, it was just there was nothing binding about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, binding in the sense of like this is how Britain works because Britain doesn't have a formal constitution or anything. Basically, this if I were to describe Britain's system of law, so Australia's is codify it mostly in a constitution. America's is codify everything in the constitution, including a Bill of Rights and everything. Britain's is just add the addendum at the end, but don't be silly. So like, it's not legally binding, but don't be silly.
Come on, yeah, like
if you've asked the people, you've asked the people.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Okay, so do you think a Tory, if Jeremy Hunt had got in, he would have sought to not do Brexit or just to soft Brexit?
To do a soft Brexit, yeah.
Okay.
So he voted Remain, but like Theresa May was like, the people have spoken, we can't undo that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll push ahead with the soft Brexit and try and negotiate with Brussels. So this is going on in July.
Yeah. That's interesting that the sentiment in the party seems like there's a lot of Remainers, just in terms of the top tier of leadership.
Well,
and like the last 2 prime ministers before Boris.
Yeah.
And also the people, going for the next role.
Well, Brexit wasn't a left versus right or a Tory versus Labour issue. It was a status quo versus populist sort of thing of like, do you want to keep the system or rip up the system? And so in the Conservative, like Margaret Thatcher, the icon of the Conservative Party, was a huge EU person. And because of basically the absence of tariffs and free trade that you could do within that sort of bloc. But then you have your people that are less free market conservative, and Boris isn't particularly free market conservative. He's just whatever Boris feels like on the day, as it became apparent over time. And again, we have, on pretty good evidence, him completely supporting the EU until it gets to the referendum, and then he just changes his tune. So I'd argue that Boris is a political opportunist. Like any kind of big referendum, yes versus no, national-wide debate, just sticking on one side of the debate can get you huge clout with a particular portion of the population. So upon coming in, the EU gave Boris until the 31st of October to get Brexit done. To avoid an alliance of soft Brexiters negotiating behind his back and therefore getting it through Parliament, he actually tried to suspend Parliament until after Halloween. When the Supreme Court denied this, he called for an early election. So 2019 election is fascinating for a couple of reasons. There's this huge swing towards the Conservatives, and they end up winning really comfortably. There's a couple of reasons why they did win comfortably. One, it was a referendum on Brexit, And Jeremy Corbyn didn't really, because it was only 2 years since the last election, he didn't really change his approach that much. Jeremy Corbyn just kind of said, fund the NHS, put money into public services, and we'll get a proper Brexit deal done. Boris Johnson was like hard Brexit, no deal Brexit. The key thing was that Nigel Farage, who has his Brexit party, he actually runs in the domestic ones. So he runs in the UK general election in 2019 as well. And Boris is like, bro, I'm already campaigning hard on Brexit. There's one issue that you care about. We've got you covered. So they do a deal where Nigel Farage does not contest any electorate that is currently held by a Conservative member. He only contests Labour-held electorates. And because Britain has a first past the post system, not a preferential system, a lot of people were like, well, I love Brexit. I want Brexit to happen. But if I vote for Nigel Farage and his party, I'm probably just wasting my vote. So instead, I will vote for the Tories because Boris Johnson is for Brexit anyway. And so Boris just soaked up every single pro-Brexit vote, soaked up the Conservative votes that refused to go for Labour. A lot of people within Labour campaigned against Jeremy Corbyn because they didn't like his particular brand of politics. And yeah, it was an absolute whitewash for Boris Johnson. So under Theresa May, they had minority government. Under Boris Johnson, they went back into a majority quite comfortably. And yeah, really convincingly won the 2019 election. Surprising. So Burnley went Tory for the first time in over 100 years. You look at there's other ones you got Workington, which is an electorate in Carlisle, so I think northwest. That went to the Conservatives. We've got Bishop Auckland, so near Hartlepool. That's the northeast. That went to the Tories. And then we've got, I think it's pronounced Boslova or Boslova. It's in Derbyshire. That went to the Tories as well. And then Burnley was the real shocking one.
Oh, Burnley.
And I think it just showed that when it came to the it came to the upcoming election in 2019, I think it just showed where kind of people felt. Anyway, I'll break down the 2019 election in a moment, but there's this rising tide of people that are traditionally Labour voters going, we want Brexit to happen. And the conventional strategy of...
What are their motives for that, Cam?
Immigration.
Why are people in Burnley so worried about immigration?
Just more people to compete against in the job market. Again, they're going to London. They're not going to Burnley.
That was my thinking.
Yeah, totally.
I guess they were never really big on signing foreign players.
Dyke really is the founder of Brexit law.
Some difficulties in signing players and...
Yeah, so basically the overarching sentiment is we're going to see manufacturing jobs be kind of shipped away. That was one. So these free trade deals that we signed with the EU means that because they can manufacture cheaper than us, we're going to buy and we're going to import from them rather than export to them, which means it's bad for our job prospects. We want our manufacturing jobs, and the migration one was probably the big one because that was the way they framed it was they made Brexit a culture war rather than just a policy war.
They ended up leaving the EU in January. By the way, let's just say that this video gets 10,000 views. If 10,000 of you gave us a rating and followed us on Spotify, there is absolutely no question that we wouldn't be just a top 10 history podcast, but we'd actually be a top 5. It would really mean the world to myself, Ben, and PY if you were to do that. Now, when it comes to the Boris Johnson years, COVID happened and he nearly died, but no one here really wants to relive 2020. So let's go to his main policy.
We're going to very quickly zoom out of COVID and talk about some of his lesser known policies for a moment, and then we'll come back to COVID at the end. He creates a new ministry and gives a new job title to someone. They get to be the Minister for Levelling Up. Wow.
Oh my gosh. That is that not just the improvement award of politics?
I just love it if you had so basically the Level Up scheme was, look, all these traditionally Labour voting electorates voted for us on the promise that we would kind of get out of Brexit, do Brexit, get out of the EU, and also kind of make their life better and give them new infrastructure. We need to follow through on that, otherwise they're going to turn back to Labour and we'll lose them as voters. So the Levelling Up project was basically an attempt to build infrastructure in places outside of London. Now, I think there was a mixed opportunity to really lean into the language and go this is the double XP weekend we're building. Some of the projects that might kind of tickle your fancy: Blackpool, the often known as the poorest area of the UK, got a $40 million new uni campus, £40 million, I should say, new uni campus. Sunderland got a new bridge, a new pedestrian bridge.
Nice.
Because they got all those ones up in Newcastle.
Across the Tyne.
Yeah, they got to go down the river.
The Tyne.
Grimsby got a £21 million cinema.
Great. Good for them.
£21 million
Yeah,
for a cinema.
a lot of land.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Fair play.
Must do gold class.
Yeah.
Birmingham got a 207 million tram extension.
Nice.
And Manchester got a £243 million new metro link. Having parties during
COVID parties.
COVID parties during lockdown. It starts not with anything that implicates Boris as being there. It's just in the vicinity of 10 Downing Street, his staff members were hosting parties that he probably would have known about. And so Boris, in November of 2021, Boris gets up and he goes, all guidance was followed. And basically there's nothing to worry about at all. You know, all guidance was followed and these were not parties, these were work meetings. And basically he kind of said, like, in Parliament, I'm telling you, these were not parties. As more came to light, it became quite apparent that these were parties. These were described as parties while they were there. So in May of 2020, there was one called Bring Your Own Booze. Doesn't sound like a meeting to me.
Yeah, no, that's pretty clear agenda item there.
His fiance then hosts a party in November of 2020 and he has text messages calling it party. This is on the day that Dominic Cummings resigned. So she threw a party because her rival.
Her op.
Yeah. So that's pretty bad himself. And then in December of 2020, they have a Christmas party. And so Boris he says all of this at the beginning of end of 2021, beginning of 2022. And he's very clear. He's like, I am telling you the truth. We did not host these parties. At this point, they don't know all this information that I just told you then. But he's like, I'm telling you, we did not have these parties. And to prove it, I am going to get the head of the Prime Minister's secretary, basically, the head of the civil service. Her name is Sue Gray. She can do an investigation into this because I am telling you that it didn't happen. Fast forward to February of 2022. Like in November of 2015, there was a sea of profile picture flags.
Mm-hmm.
It was Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, of course. Wow, 3 years.
Yeah.
Damn.
I mean, just on the parties, it's just so dumb. I mean, way to get the nation on side.
Yeah.
You know, we're imposing the rules, but we're not following the rules.
And this was
That's just leadership 101.
This is after Dominic Cummings had his thing in 2020 as well. Yeah. So bizarre. But again, Boris is Boris.
Yeah. You know.
Yep.
Who can blame him? Hey, he's just being his true self.
So in February of 2020, we have the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. And straight away, Johnson channels Churchill and he presses NATO hard to throw as much support at Ukraine as possible. And basically, he goes to the arguments that you would have heard before of if Ukraine falls, then Putin is enabled and Russia becomes a threat to the global order and what messages it sent to China if we don't oppose them here, yada yada. He goes for all those messages. And NATO agree with him and NATO back him. And this is considered Boris Johnson's shining moment in the sun, that he has rallied support for Ukraine and he himself pledges £2.3 billion of military aid to the Ukrainians. He also pledged to train 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers by the middle of 2022. And then he obviously put sanctions on Russia as well. That was a given that he was going to do. But on March the 29th, Turkey actually facilitated peace talks between Russia and Ukraine.
Oh, wow. So early on.
Yeah, super. Because again, the initial phrase was that this was going to be a 3-day, then
special military operation.
Yeah, and basically that didn't happen because of the aid. As you know, I don't know if you saw Trump talking to Zelensky, and yeah,
I saw it.
He cuts Trump off when Trump's like, without us, you would have had 3 weeks. And Zelensky goes, 3 days. I heard it from Putin, basically meaning like, yeah, of course, we would have not survived without your aid. Anyway, by March, Ukraine is still going strong and doing way better than people are expecting. And so peace talks are beginning and starting to take place in March, mediated by Turkey and a pro-Russian Ukrainian newspaper. So again, you got to remember that the east of Ukraine actually is quite sympathetic towards Russia. So one of these
pro-Russian newspapers alleged that Johnson had told Vladimir Zelensky that the West wouldn't recognize any deal that he cuts with Putin without them. Meaning basically saying, don't sign the Turkey deal. And he was allegedly urging Ukraine to fight rather than to settle. And basically the allegation is that he prolonged the Ukrainian war because it was good for him politically, because it was a distraction from Partygate.
Wow, that's quite an allegation.
It is a very big allegation.
Prolonging a war so that people forget that you had little COVID parties.
Now, if you think about it and we work backwards, so obviously pro-Russian newspaper, they're going to have their biases, and you can straight away go that this is Kremlin propaganda. Cool. Happy to do that. Take the bias out of it. Just see, do these accusations stand up to merit? And you look at it and you go like, when did Boris Johnson visit Ukraine? He visited in April. When did the Turkey talks break down? They broke down in March. Which means that if Boris Johnson said something, he couldn't have actually said it from within Ukraine. So this allegation isn't taken very seriously at all. And then I'm kind of putting it out there because this was a strong accusation against Boris at the time, because Ukraine was really good PR for him and Partygate was really bad PR for him. But in the same way that people were kind of suggesting that Gladys wanted to extend the lockdown as long as she did because it was kind of like a game of chicken with ICAC. Like, if I make this such a big crisis because you can't get rid of your premier in a time of crisis sort of thing. And that didn't happen, so that she stepped down. Anyway, so that's the allegation that's made against Boris. As we are moving further and further into 2022, it's becoming more and more apparent that he has not been all that truthful when it comes to Partygate. Photos, not only is it become aware that there's now text messages with Boris calling it a party. Boris's initial defense was, oh no, I meant party as in gathering of people, not as in a celebratory party, just as in third party, something like that, just like gathering of people. It's like, yeah, that's the gathering of people was the way you worded the law as being. It's like, ooh. And then kind of after that, he gets photographed being at these parties where they do a mock press conference about social distancing. And at the party, Boris himself is saying, oh, this is so not social distancing.
Yeah.
Not in a reprimanding way, in like a trivial way.
Not a good look.
So...
Yeah. And he nearly died from COVID.
Yeah, I know. So then they go after, like, Keir Starmer goes, Boris has to resign. If I had this allegation that was made against me, I'm telling you, I will resign. So he had an ongoing thing because he was charged with having an illegal gathering at the pub, and nothing more came from it. It was resolved quite quickly with his workers. So as that was going on, he was like, if the police lay charges against me, I'll resign. That's the standard I'm setting for myself. If they do, I'll step down. That's the standard you should set for yourself. And Boris goes, no. And they go, but you lied to Parliament. We have evidence. He's like, I didn't lie to Parliament. Lying implies that you deliberately misled Parliament. I accidentally misled Parliament. I didn't remember correctly. And you go back and play the tapes. It's like, did you or did you not? And he's like, we did not. And Boris's argument is, he's like, how could you, I wasn't lying. I just didn't remember it correctly. I just remembered it differently. I was being sincere to how I remembered the events. And that's the thing. Anyway, so Boris is going, I'm not stepping down. I'm not stepping down. I'm not stepping down. Like, this drags on for half a year, middle of 2022. He is losing minister after minister, because in the British government, it takes a lot to get rid of your prime minister. In Australia, it's super easy. Just majority of the party speaks. You have to have a, vote of no confidence that goes across the whole parliament. So the Conservatives know they'll shoot themselves in the foot if they do that. So what they try and do is they try and force his hand to step down voluntarily. And so people resign from his cabinet, basically as if to say, good luck forming a cabinet without us. And so Boris is now having to appoint less and less talented people to all of these cabinet posts because he's just running out of supporters. The thing that seals the deal for Boris Johnson is to do with a person called Chris Pincher.
Good name. I like it.
I'm going to continue on because his name is rather unfortunate. And close to Chris Finch in one respect, so he has some kudos there. In 2017, there were allegations made that Chris Pincher illegally groped...
I was wondering why you sort of paused when I said it was a good name, and now it makes complete sense.
Kind of groped. Well, okay, there's more to it. So Chris Pincher in 2017 was alleged of groping other men. And basically, he was made a cabinet secretary by Boris Johnson, so made a minister of cabinet by Boris Johnson.
In 2022, these allegations came to light, and Boris Johnson's stance was, "Oh, we didn't know about this. Had we known about this, we never would have put him there." And then you go back through old meetings and people that are talking about their interaction with Boris Johnson, and there's an interaction where Boris Johnson goes, "Pincher by name, pincher by nature," when talking about Chris Pincher. And that's the nail in the coffin. So Partygate is pretty much kills Boris Johnson. And again, it's kind of like, oh, is this guy lying to us? It's like, I don't know. Did leave his wife for a 30-year-old? Maybe that might indicate about obviously things are messy, things can happen.
Trustworthiness, yeah.
But the kind of nature of the truth and whatnot, has lied on Partygate objectively here. And so Boris kind of does the same thing of but I didn't remember saying that. I don't remember. Oh, maybe it's coming back to me. I can't really, and kind of basically pleads ignorance. And so Rishi Sunak, who was part of his cabinet, he resigns, and that is considered the final nail in the coffin for Boris Johnson. And he then, in the middle of 2022, has no choice but to step down because he just has no high-profile ministers that are supporting him at all. Now, he doesn't step back from Parliament entirely. He's still in the backbenches, basically plotting his revenge. In Boris's wake, 2 people contested to be the leader. The first was Rishi Sunak, who Boris deemed to be a traitor, and the second was someone who basically worshipped Margaret Thatcher, Liz Truss. Johnson sided with her.
What the UK, right? That would have been were stock prices falling down?
Yes,
because no one went to work for.
No,
was there a week of mourning?
The pound suffered, but that was nothing to do with the Queen in my own mind.
Sure.
It's because of what Liz Truss did 2 weeks afterwards. So typically the budget gets passed in either March or October. And if you want to correct course for the previous government, you do an October budget to be the March budget. Those guys kind of didn't know what they're talking about. So Liz Truss goes to do what they call a mini budget in October to kind of correct the course of Boris Johnson. So Boris had this belief. Remember the name of his infrastructure policy?
Oh, it was
the Great Leap Forward.
Oh. That's good. That's Mao.
No, I'm joking.
You on the right, very much. On the right.
I remember it was something grand like that.
Was there alliteration?
No, but video game.
Level up.
Yeah, nice.
So Boris was not that big into austerity. He was kind of threw money at situations, and he quite liberally threw money in some cases at some infrastructure projects, were good infrastructure projects in the regional areas. Liz Truss, it kind of goes, well, that's nonsense.
Did you see the Man United stadium?
No.
That would be a level up though, wouldn't it?
You haven't seen it? The new concept?
Oh, I've seen the, yes, I have seen the new concept.
Yeah. Just speaking of British infrastructure.
So I thought, I was maybe, I remember there was a big leak in the United Stadium last year.
Yeah. No,
a lot of it's a metaphor for your defense.
Yeah. Got a bad rap, but I think it looks kind of cool.
Yeah. I'm pumped for Everton's new one. Couple months.
You're not going to miss Goodison?
Oh, well, yeah. I can feel 2 things at once.
I feel like our experience at Goodison indicated that it needed an upgrade, I think.
It's time to move on.
The fact that when we stood up, we couldn't see the goal at the other end.
Well, it's kind of sad though. It's such an old stadium.
Oldest just stadium.
Yeah,
being in functionality right now.
Yeah. But hey, that sign of the times.
So Liz Truss passes her mini budget, and she is not a fan of leveling up because she's like, "What do you mean, government wealth redistribution? No. You go no taxes, no spending." Well, that's Margaret Thatcher said it first. We are a product of individuals, and we want to allow for maximum possible individual freedom. So tax less, spend less, no more leveling up. And so she announces this in her mini budget, where she goes, "I'm going to hit the nation's biggest priorities," and the kind of nation's like, "Oh, okay, awesome." So prices are soaring off the back of Russia-Ukraine, and we're in a cost of living crisis. We're having really bad inflation. What sort of cost of living relief are we going to get from this budget? The top tax rate is going to be cut from.
Hell yeah!
Yeah, my kind of
trickle down economic.
So she basically announces her plan to cut the top tax rate in corporate tax and the top income tax, and her kind of rationale is, off the back of Russia-Ukraine, we're having really bad inflation. This will attract investment into the economy. And even people in the Conservative Party, even business leaders that would love tax cuts in any other circumstance, they're like, do we want
more money in the economy? Isn't that what inflation is? We've got too much money in circulation relative to the value of products being created. We don't want investment. That's like the worst possible thing that we could have in the economy right now, because investment equals money, but no product as of yet. That product will come in the future, which will mean inflation gets really bad. And it's so bizarre because when we come to David Cameron, he tackled inflation instead of unemployment when everyone was saying you should tackle unemployment, not inflation. Liz Truss tackles unemployment instead of inflation when everyone says the economy's fine, people have jobs, that's not an issue. We should pump the brakes on the economy, make sure it doesn't grow too quickly so that inflation doesn't get out of hand and people's savings don't get eaten away and that sort of thing. So she prioritized unemployment instead of inflation when the rest of the world was prioritizing inflation over unemployment, and David Cameron did the opposite. So the Tories really are becoming opposite land in how they function their economy. And this does not go down well with the British people. It doesn't go down well even in the Conservative Party. And her mini budget is called a disaster. That is when the pound starts dropping, because people are basically trying to sell their pounds. So anyone that operates in international currency, they like, sometimes I get YouTube to pay me in pounds.
Tell me why.
Because it's strong. And relative, it doesn't make
international money mover.
It doesn't.
Look at him go.
Doesn't make any functional difference really, because it gets converted in the end and kind of aggregates itself out.
You should get a British bank account.
I did have one when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I've got British government bonds from like Tony Blair era.
I remember. Yeah,
like Tony, time to pay up. No, so what was that before? Oh, people selling their pounds.
Sell.
Because they're like, basically inflation's going to go through the roof now because this economy is overheated massively, and the value of the pound is going to devalue quite a lot. I'm going to try and transfer out of pounds and into the US dollar, and so the pound rapidly fell in value. Remember when we talked about Keating of floated currency versus fixed currency? Mm-hmm. The pound is a completely floated currency, which means the central bank doesn't control the value of it at all. The market entirely controls the value of the pound. And so as a response, people were selling their pounds because they're like, this is going to devalue quite quickly because inflation is going to get really badly out of hand. I don't know anything about economics. I'm pretty, I don't know the complex theory. That's pretty economics 101. You can kind of follow the cause effect and you can be like, look, no matter how ideological you are, Thatcherite economic policies clearly are not appropriate for this situation. Anyway, so she announced that mini budget. The pound rapidly falls and it's a huge disaster. In order to curb inflation, Bank of England, they're the equivalent of the Reserve Bank of Australia. What do reserve banks do when they hit inflation?
Oh, interest rates.
Yeah, hike up the interest rates.
Yeah.
And so we have, because London's a very similar situation to Sydney in terms of housing affordability. And so people that are kind of debt slaves to their houses in London the same way that they really are in Sydney are told, your mortgage is now an extra percentage point. Oh, and it's another percentage point. Yeah, which is just the most crippling news you can hear if you've really overextended yourself to get your house. And so there's the most nailed on Liz Truss Tory supporter. If they have a mortgage, they're even going. It's even MPs are like, Liz, I have a mortgage, please don't do this. And she's like, no, we got to follow Thatcher's, she set the gold standard for what we do. And I've made a promise and I do what I say. I don't say what I do.
Yeah, I can see her having a Thatcher poster in her bedroom. It's like, I'm trying.
I'm going to make you proud.
Yeah. And it's like, it's absolutely wild. And it's kind of the thing of Boris Johnson, not an idiot, plays an idiot. He clearly isn't. He absolutely would have known that this wouldn't have ended well putting Liz Truss forward. Clearly, Rishi Sunak was a far better candidate than Liz Truss. Whatever your politics are, just Rishi Sunak at least has a worldview of, I can respond to market conditions, not I dictate market conditions. And, I think a lot of culpability is on Boris's hands here for playing the role of a faction boss and getting his supporters to back Liz Truss to get her into that showdown with Rishi Sunak so that he could enact revenge rather than do what's in the public and nation's interest.
So who had the power to put Sunak in?
So Conservative Party, you have to, basically it's an internal popularity contest.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then out of those last two, it's the MPs don't vote, it's the public who votes. if you're a registered member
so
of the
the
Conservative
the
Party.
public had the choice between Truss and Sunak.
Yeah, and they went for Truss.
Yeah, well, that's on them.
But it's not the general public. It's just the Conservative Party.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
oh, absolutely. If
And
you-
why did the general public not like Sunak?
well, the general public likes Sunak more than.
Oh, I mean,
Truss.
okay. Why did the people a part of the party did not like
Because
him
the
as
people
much as
who
Truss?
join a political party are the most ideologically friendly. Like you think
Sure,
about
sure,
people
sure,
who we know
sure.
that are
Okay.
members of political parties, they're usually not centrists.
Yeah, it's because
And so then you get rewarded for having the most. And this we saw this for Corbyn as well.
Yep.
Right or left, whatever kind of way your party membership swings, the most right or left of centre gets rewarded in the popularity contest. So
yeah.
and this is why the system is dumb. And like, I much prefer. I know Kevin Rudd implemented democratic reforms, and it's way better than England's system still. But I still don't like the idea of the public choosing the party's leader, because you inevitably reach a point where if the public disagrees with the party, you reach a total standoff, and nothing gets done. I know it was annoying when faceless suits knifed Kevin Rudd the first time. But if the alternative is that the public gets to choose, then you get a Jeremy Corbyn situation where someone who's really popular but not liked within the party, and yeah. So
It says like Boris is like, you're all coming down with me.
oh yeah, he enacted a huge revenge campaign and
Just taking his ball and going home.
yeah, tried to really deny Rishi Sunak the path to being prime minister. And so yeah, it was crazy. Anyway, so Liz Truss, it's a disastrous budget that's not doing well. Universal condemnation, pretty much across the board entirely. The ones who didn't, Sky News, Australia.
The Bolt Report.
Finally, someone who gets it. And so if you remember, her Chancellor of the Exchequer was Kwasi Kwarteng. And really cool guy. One of the saddest things. So he's over in America, chilling with Joe Biden. And Liz Truss is like, this is a disaster. You got to come home. And he's like, I'm with Joe Biden. Like, no, I'm not doing that. She's like, no, you've got to. And so anyway, gets on a plane, leaves a day early. And as he gets into the car, he sees a tweet from a pretty reputable reporter saying Kwasi Kwarteng fired. And then he gets to Liz Truss's office straight from Heathrow and finds out he's fired. And he's kind of like, man, you couldn't have waited one more day. I was chilling with Joe Biden.
Damn.
You called me home just to do this. So she tries to, her strategy then is to shift the blame entirely onto Kwasi Kwarteng.
Oh, not our boy.
I know. And he also was a big fan of this style of economics, but
I was going to say, he probably has a role to play if he's...
No, but he's got a cool
the
sounding name,
treasurer.
Jake.
Yeah.
and he's got the conservative charm that he's got David Cameron's.
He's polite. He's well mannered.
Anyway, this is not looking good for Liz Truss. The second issue comes to do with fracking. So like extracting gas. So because of it caused some quite bad tremors in Blackpool. Blackpool's gotten a lot of shout outs this month, which just makes me so happy. I don't know.
Charlie Adam.
Stanley Matthews. 50s icon. There's an epic FA Cup final between Bolton and Blackpool from the 50s, 5-3, if I'm not mistaken.
Right on.
Yeah. It's like, I tried to recreate it in my Blackpool career mode. Anyway,
I digress.
I tried to attract investment to that region by having a successful football team. Anyway, so yeah, fracking was temporarily banned in 2019 because it was causing quite bad tremors to Blackpool. Also at the same time, it's just this movement towards gas. If you're going to go net zero, better just to kind of try and use wind rather than gas as a source of energy anyway. And so Labor goes, ooh, we can, if we put something, what is the bill we could put forward that will divide the Conservative Party the most? Because Liz Truss doesn't have control of the party right now because they hate her for this mini budget she passed because she didn't even consult them. She just ran it through without going to guys like Rishi Sunak, without going to guys like Jeremy Hunt. So they go, okay, what's the thing that can divide them the most? I generally lean Labor, but I have no doubt, there's not an ounce in my body that makes me think, oh, they really wanted to protect the environment here. They wanted to just catch the Conservatives out. So they go, okay, why don't we permanently ban fracking the same way that we have a nuclear ban in Australia for nuclear energy? And they go, okay, why don't we do that? They put it out there. Liz Truss was like, no, we're not going to do that because off the back of Russia-Ukraine, we need to have access to our own gas supplies. This is not the time to do it. So they knew where Liz Truss was going to fall, but they knew the kind of Rishi Sunak faction like to present themselves as environmentalists. And so they knew that would be an issue that could divide the two factions in the Conservative Party.
Clever.
And so in Australia, I think we discussed this in a previous pod, you have to vote with your party on pretty much everything. So party discipline is strong. We don't really need whips in Australia, but you need your whips in England to keep your party in order. So Liz Truss goes, this is what we call a confidence vote, which in Australia means the exact opposite to what it means in England. In Australia, a confidence vote means you can vote however you want. In England, it means you have to vote with the party. So she's basically gone captain's call. We're going ahead with with allowing fracking. And a lot of people in the Conservative Party don't like that, particularly if they're from a rich London electorate that are kind of champagne socialist. They can't bring that back to their electorate and survive the next cycle. So they kind of go, no. There were reports of bullying and physical harassment to try and whip people to, not literally whip, but yeah, pretty much do everything but literally whip to get people to vote. There was shouting, pushing, physical intimidation. It was a bit of a disaster.
I thought we were past that, guys. Come on.
I think it was a bit of a Roy Keane, Patrick Vieira in the in the tunnel. And it didn't get through. And Liz Truss could not run her government. Because it divided the Conservative Party and they didn't vote as a bloc, and they already hated her for the mini budget. And so in October, she took over in September. In October, she resigned, saying she wasn't able to lead the government. The shortest serving Prime Minister in British history. When Liz Truss resigned, Rishi Sunak then replaced her unopposed. And at that point, it was very clear that no matter how well Sunak did, the Tories were definitely going to lose the 2024 election. So Sunak's job was to simply try and prevent the Tories from suffering their worst ever defeat. You mentioned getting Nigel Farage in a previous podcast. And
what was the context? Why did I say that?
Just Brexit.
Yeah, okay.
Now, in 2019, the Brexit Party, Conservative Party tension was dealt with by Nigel Farage agreeing not to run in Conservative-held electorates. So he wasn't really a threat. Nigel Farage is kind of smelling where the wind is going. Wait, that's not telling, sniffing.
I don't know. Yeah, he has some means of indicating the direction of the wind.
And he goes
sensing.
Yeah, sensing where the wind is going.
He's picking grass off the ground and tossing it in the air to see which way it's going.
The Conservative Party could be on track for as few as 40 seats. That's like Liberal Democrat levels.
Out of how many?
Like 600 and something.
Yeah, that's not a lot.
Yeah,
about a stinker.
So he doesn't have the Brexit Party's done, the UKIP's done. So he initially goes, look, I am focused. I've got bigger fish to fry. I need to get Donald Trump elected at the end of the year. I'm not going to run in the UK general election at all.
Wait, sorry, what's the Trump comment?
Trump loves Nigel Farage. Anyway, so he's like, not interested in the UK election, just focusing. Brexit's done now. I had my moment. And then he's kind of looking at the data and he's like, oh my goodness, because the Conservative Party is so unpopular, even with their own voting base. On one hand, Boris Johnson has showed very little morality in public office. On the other hand, right-wingers in the Conservative Party thinks Sunak's an SJW. What we can do, if we walk in and make ourselves an alternative vote for a Conservative Party, we could possibly get more seats than the Conservative Party. If we do, we could form a coalition together and I could be the opposition leader. Which is crazy considering he's not part of a major party. Imagine Albo having such a bad election prospect that the Greens could get more seats than Albo, and then all of a sudden it's like Max Chandler-Mather or someone who's the opposition leader, not Albo, or whoever the Labor puts forward. And so the Conservative Party is freaking out at this point because not only are they going to lose, and Sunak knows that guaranteed they're going to lose, they could lose horrifically, and people, because they know the Conservatives are going to lose, they might start doing protest votes, particularly for Nigel Farage's Reform Party. And to think, Nigel Farage, kind of his campaign he was like, Labor's going to win. It's like, okay, not really a strong campaign, just right off the bat saying Labor's going to win. He's like, and so you have the chance to make us the real opposition. You can do away, you can cast a protest vote that has the opposition party led by a true Conservative, not that Rishi Sunak guy. And in the end, it doesn't end up eventuating, but it very nearly could have. The last election thing that I want to focus on before we wrap up today's pod. Do you remember any of Rishi Sunak's policies last year? They had one that really made the news everywhere.
The free school meals.
Oh, no, that's not that, unfortunately.
Was that under him?
So.
Was that when Rashford was campaigning and then
was that around COVID though?
Well, Rashford was campaigning around then, but I thought it was sort of reversed a few years later.
Yeah, I kind of took my eye off the ball on that front. School meal sounds familiar. Not school meals. It was the idea of national service.
Oh.
Like, so everyone, when you turn 18, there were two things you could do. One option was basically a year of service in the military. So that was one option.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of like a South Korea, Israel model where they do that.
Yep.
Another option was mandatory. You have to do 25 days of service with either the NHS, the fireys, the cops, or charities as well.
Okay.
And you have to do that when you turn 18.
I'm not opposed to it, particularly the second option. I think it's good to see the vision there. Throw some.
Like, what do they? Why would a fire department want an 18-year-old? Wouldn't that just be more work for them?
I think that's just work experience though. Like.
Yeah. Oh, they could probably put the hose on the hydrant, maybe.
Yeah.
Did you turn that poll?
Hey?
Yeah. I don't know.
I see the vision.
Yeah, like Sunak got heaps of flack for it, and
so he was bringing this in or phasing it out.
Bringing it in. He was like, "Let's do this." Like,
okay. And they didn't have any semblance of this sort of stuff prior to that. Like he wasn't building on something that existed.
Not really. It exists in other countries, but not in Britain.
Yeah. And
basically, it's like it creates a stronger sense of civic duty to your fellow citizens in the country. It's a great learning experience for people when they turn 18. And I think it will have economic benefits for us because, and this is where I completely agree with him, rather than playing Counter-Strike all day for your first year out of school, let's say you join the army, you learn the value of discipline. Like army guys, typically, unless they have PTSD, unfortunately, typically army soldiers, like people who leave the army, kill it at whatever job they do next because the skill of discipline is what they learned in the army more than anything. He's like, we're going to have a much more productive workforce as a result of this. And again, like, I think it's true. Also, it gives people a little income. Like it's a little job that you can give to a 19-year-old or 18-year-old, someone in their 19th year. Again, you can give them £20,000 a year. They can then go to university after that, and that's going to put them in a better position to study at university because they can be more focused on their studies as opposed to having to take heaps of kind of shift work to fill the difference and all that sort of thing. I love the idea of national service, and I'm a little bit more comfortable with the government telling you what to do. Like time has gone on, I've become a little bit more...
As probably Australians are more broadly as well than maybe
on some things.
On some things, yeah.
I think a national service would be very unpopular in Australia. Like, yeah,
I could see the vision, but I wouldn't want to actually have to fight anywhere.
I think it's army reserves. I don't think it's frontline. So you would only have combat if we got invaded. So. Again,
that'd be cool. You'd probably get jacked as well by the end of the year.
Yeah, you would. And like, surely then when you come back, like people who take a gap year. I'm not knocking the concept of a gap year, but typically it's like either I'm going to go travel, or so you add nothing to you stimulate other countries' economies, not your own, or I'll kind of work a year in Coles so I can save up to when I start uni. I've got a better nest egg to work with. So imagine instead of working those hours in Coles, you have them train in some part that can give kind of real contribution to the community and at the same time develop skills that will be useful for their future career. And I say as someone who worked in a supermarket, unfortunately, it is...
Really?
Yeah, Superbarn. I used to work in Superbarn, San Susie.
Oh, I do not remember this era.
Yeah, it was literally after when I finished my HSC. Yeah, it was so boring.
Anyway, there you go.
I think I would have been better served working for a charity or working for the cops or just getting your shoe in there. So anyway, that was Rishi Sunak's proposal. Keir Starmer called it a gimmick. And just before we finish, I've got one more Keir Starmer clip to show you.
I like it. Is this one also funny?
Why is his name Keir?
So he is talking about the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and he wants the release of hostages.
And when is this?
This is after he becomes Prime Minister. So it's chronologically outside of the canon, but just it's too funny not to
And so we're talking like sometime last year?
Last year, yeah.
Yeah.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages, and a recommitment to the two-state solution. A recognised Palestinian state alongside a...
Oh, he's good that they were applauding during that, because it seemed like he got away with it in at least in the live audience.
Surely, you have to acknowledge, there's no way. I know you don't want to lose the seriousness of the moment, but
just say forgive me, hostages or something. Yeah.
How hard would it be in the crowd to stifle your laughter?
Yeah.
Because if it gets acknowledged, the tension gets broken. You can release, but you got to then act like that just didn't happen, which makes it so funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is in I get Freudian slips of the tongue. I was a teacher. You have plenty of moments where you're just yapping because you're yapping so long throughout a day that you say weird words that you don't mean to put in there. How has he gotten sausages instead of hostages?
I think he was going to say soldiers.
Oh, that's a good theory, actually.
I like that's a really good soldiers and hostages
because I was looking
sausages.
at him, he's gonna say soldiers, and then he realized that I was meant to say hostages, so he added the E. So it went to sausages.
Sausages. I mean,
and then he realized, and then waited hostages.
Hostages.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
How?
He says it so earnestly as well that I've sort of believed in the first time. He's like, we call for a ceasefire in Gaza and we need to bring home the sausages, the hostages. He really meant it.
Yeah. Did you see radio commentator NRL on the weekend? He said the Knights are mucking it up again, and just as he said, the whistle blew. It sounds.
Here he comes with the skippity step.
Yeah. You can add that clip as well as that.
Just be a DJ. Anyway, we'll finish with the election results. So the Conservatives, remember, there's only 600 seats on the line, and they lost 251 seats.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, pretty bad. Which, not ideal at all. Labor picked up 211.
Nice.
Remember how the Lib Democrats from very early on? And how they kind of floundered after Brexit?
Yep.
Well, they came back. They gained 64 votes.
But that was not the Nigel Farage.
That's
thing. That was a separate group.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were pro Remain.
Yep.
The Reform Party, which was Nigel Farage's, picked up 4.
So not the big sweep that Nigel perhaps thought was coming his way.
It is estimated that they still stopped the Tories from getting 50 to 70 seats because it's first past the post. They split so many Tory electorates.
Yep.
So they took a lot of the votes, but then didn't win a majority in these.
Yeah, so if they pulled their numbers together, they would have had a majority to beat Labor.
Yeah.
So half of, just about, maybe about 60, 70%, the Conservatives could have had about 60 to 70% more seats had Nigel Farage not run.
Damn.
But yeah, he gained 14 million votes. So yeah, he only picked up 4 seats as a result of it. But had he just pushed it that extra little bit in a lot of the seats, he could have had a bigger majority than the Conservative Party, and he could have been the opposition leader. So there you are. You are now completely up to speed with everything going on in Britain. If you want to go into more detail, our 4 most recent podcasts will have that all there for you. And if you want to do the same thing for other countries, the podcast goes through plenty of others with heaps and heaps, and I do mean heaps, on Australian history as well. So with my complete blessing, go close the tab that has me talking to you right now and go listen to the podcast.